Hey everyone, I'm Chrissy Durkin. I'm the Director of International Expansion at Rainforest Connection. We're a nonprofit tech startup using an acoustic monitoring system to listen for sounds of biodiversity and threats in ecosystems. So then we can use AI to pick out whatever sounds we're interested in, whether that's a chainsaw or a howler monkey. Rainforest Connection was originally founded back in 2013 by Topher White. He had an idea to take what was already existing, cell phones and the cell network, to create a system that makes it possible to effectively monitor huge expanses of land to stop illegal activities. So he was able to see a challenge and what was available to him to create a solution that's both effective and scalable. And we've since built tremendously off this original idea. So I want to introduce Topher, Rainforest Connection's founder and CEO, to tell you more about it.
Thank you so much, Chrissy. Hey, the Director of International Expansion, we are all over the place. So speaking of the rainforest, I'm going to share my screen and kind of take you into the rainforest the very first time that I actually went there back in 2012. So I'm not sure if you can hear what's happening right now in the forest, but when you go into the forest, one of the first things that hits you is the sound of the forest that you kind of notice the most. There's this cacophony of noise throughout this ecosystem, but occasionally there are like some things that actually stick out the most. Like some species can actually come into it. So occasionally you hear like big birds, you hear monkeys, you hear insects. Like this is a hornbill. And these are cicadas. And these are gibbons, these amazing large apes in the rainforest of Borneo. So this place that I was visiting at the time was actually a gibbon reserve. These gibbons, this is a baby gibbon. They rehabilitate these gibbons and they release them back into the wild from captivity. But this one place that was taking care of them, it was actually a full-time gibbon reserve, and there was these full-time guards there to protect it from illegal deforestation, logging on the outskirts. And one day, just walking off into the forest, stumbled upon some logging taking place on the outskirts of this reserve. They had these 3 full-time guards who were trying to guard the place, but they weren't even able to know what was happening just a few 100 meters from where they were. And this struck me as crazy that in a place like the rainforest, it's so noisy that you can't necessarily hear what's happening just a kilometer or 2 away. And so with that, it's sort of the idea, how do we use technology to help try and address this issue, to help these people there on the ground? So how do we stop illegal logging with technology? Well, there's lots of tools that are out there now. You know, satellites, I think, are obviously one of the most widespread ones. They totally changed our understanding of the extent of deforestation around the world. Camera traps are these tools for allowing you to basically catch people or animals as they walk through the forest. There's drones, of course, that's the solution to almost everything. There's aerial surveys and there's community monitoring with phones. These are all tools that have been used for years to great effect, but still it's not enough to actually catch loggers in the act. So here's the idea of what we have. The very moment that a chainsaw goes off in the forest, the sound is picked up by a device up in the trees. It sends an alert through the network to local guards on the ground to get an alert on their phones, and they're like, what? And they jump on their motorcycles and they get out there and they stop the loggers on the spot in this perfectly realistic rendition of exactly what happens. But in order to accomplish this, you do need some kind of device up there in the trees to do that listening. And why not use old phones? Phones are fantastic little computers, as Chrissy said. They can listen to all the sounds of the forest. They can package it up, and using software platforms that are available to millions of people, they can get it up into the cloud where we can then send alerts to people like that. And of course, you can put some solar panels on them and a microphone, and you can put them up in the trees for years. It's really very, very sturdy, these little phones, to be able to do that. That's how this all kind of started. This is me kind of putting this idea together specifically to be tested in the field in Indonesia, because of course assembling something in a garage is an obligatory rite of passage for any tech project. This is what it looks like up in the tree, and you know, that's fine. I can build it in San Francisco, but what about taking it back to the forest to actually test it out? So going back to Indonesia, to a different gibbon reserve, put it up in the tree, and on the second day that we installed it, picked up the sounds of chainsaws through the trees. And this guy here, he climbed the tree, put this device up there, gets back down, everyone's kind of smoking cigarettes, and then suddenly, you know, you hear this alert on my phone. And we listened in, and apparently this device had heard a chainsaw in the distance, but none of us had actually picked it up. And so we sort of took off through the forest with this group to try and catch the loggers. And this is the moment when we kind of get to the edge of where the loggers should be, right over this hill. I've been in the forest for about 2 days this time, so I really had no idea what I was into. And I didn't really kind of regret, but he's moving, so now I got to move so we get over the hill. And yeah, that's when we actually run into the loggers. And this group was able to make an impression and say, look, if you do log here again, we're going to catch you. And so based on this one event and the detection of it in real time, they're able to get there, stop the loggers in the act. And based on this, they were able to protect that area for a much longer period of time. This is an example of how real-time data can actually make a very big difference. But let's take a look at actually what's happening here. No one's listening to these devices, right? But taking chainsaws out of the forest is actually pretty easy for a computer to do. People themselves don't actually listen to all these streams. It's being analyzed using AI in the cloud. It's actually pretty easy to pick out the sounds of chainsaws, as you see here. But actually, let's back up for a minute. Saving the rainforest is obviously something that we've heard about for many, many years. I heard about it all throughout growing up. But at the same time, it's possible there's other events that are taking place on a global scale that could make a bigger difference, like climate change. But it turns out that deforestation, the destruction of forest, is the second largest contributor to climate change overall. There's more carbon put out every year from the destruction of trees than from all the cars, trucks, planes, ships combined. None of that adds up to the amount of carbon output from deforestation. And illegal logging, the destruction of forest illegally by illegal cartels, actually makes up to 90%, 50 to 90% of all the logging in the rainforest comes from illegal logging itself. And if it's legal, there's a mandate to stop it by working with local groups and governments and the rest. Stopping illegal activity is something that at least you have, with the help of local people, the right to do. Now, logging itself is not the only destruction of forest. Obviously, land use, such as agriculture and the rest, is actually what leads to the wholesale destruction of it. But illegal logging is so profitable. They just go in there with these trucks, they take out the most expensive trees, and it's so profitable from that they'll actually cut a road through the forest to get there. And if that road shows up, that's when the actual sort of real destruction of the forest takes place. So this very, very profitable illegal activity leads to the roads. The roads are what leads to the wholesale destruction of the forest. If you can stop illegal logging, you can stop the roads. If you can stop the roads, you can stop the wholesale destruction of the forest, which makes stopping illegal logging potentially one of the most quick ways for us to make a real dent and take a real bite out of this equation of climate change today. So this is how this works. Basically, you saw one of those devices up in trees. Based on this calculus, one of these devices, we call them guardians, can listen and hear the sounds of chainsaws traveling through the forest up to 1 kilometer away. That's 3 square kilometers of forest from a single one of these guardians. The amount of CO2 that's contained in that amount of forest is intense, 15,000 tons, which is equivalent to 3,000 cars off the road for a year. For every 3 square kilometers of a forest that you can work with local people to protect, it's the equivalent of taking 3,000 cars off the road. And so it's really a very urgent and important way for us to do this. And of course, you don't have to put 1,000 phones up in an area. You can just put them along the outskirts of an area, and you can detect the logging on its way in. But let's talk about this sort of in the field. You saw it in Indonesia. The next place we took it was Africa, to this place in Cameroon, where there's actually a sustainable logging concession, but they were having a big problem with poaching and illegal logging in this area. Everything was sort of going in and out through this one road into the forest and out. This was the one gate, and these were the guys that everyone assumed were being paid off and corrupt to let these illegal logging operations through. But it turns out that we put one of these devices up along the road. And what we sort of found was that the traffic was coming in and out at around 3 a.m. So again, detecting the sounds of chainsaws, detecting the sounds of vehicles, the signal looks very, very similar. So a computer can actually pick these things out just as easily, so people don't have to listen. And we found that most of the traffic was actually not going through the gate. It was going down the road in the middle of the night, and they were cutting a path around the gate to get out around those guards. So in many ways, they were vindicated, and operations were able to take place to sort of cut that off where they were. But let's go somewhere different. Let's talk about Brazil. Actually, I'm going to back up for a minute. Let's take a look at Brazil. So if you look at the outskirts of Brazil, you see this sort of ocean of deforestation with these pretty intact areas of forest. On the outskirts, almost like islands of forest. One of those is this place here called the Tembe Reserve in northern Brazil. This red area here is an indigenous tribal area. This is the Tembe. There's about 1,500 of them left, 1,500. And the area that's here in white, this purple area here was almost entirely occupied by illegal loggers, drug cartels, and illegal logging operations when we first sort of met them in 2014. And just moving between, say, the areas up in the north and the areas down here in the south, they would run into full-scale logging operations, just going from one village to the next, entirely new, brand new trucks. And in this situation, all you can really do for them is just kind of to, put the pedal down and get out of there, because it is very dangerous. These are illegal cartels that are actually taking the wood out, and any disruption to that is a threat. So clearly, for these people here, just operating on their own land, it was an existential threat for them. Historically, they're tied very much to the forest. They don't really feel like they could live there without it. And this is the only land they have. So for them, it was an existential threat. So they banded together, actually got 30 volunteer rangers. They equipped them and said, look, these 30 rangers are going to act as the security force for this area. But this is a very large area. This is like 2,500 square kilometers of land. And just 30 rangers, trying to track the forest to be able to get around was clearly not something they could do on their own. So, but it turns out there's actually reasonable cell phone coverage in this area. There's no police, there's no towns really to speak of to the west of here, but there are cell phone towers. But we're talking about a good 20, 30 kilometers from the outskirts of the reserve. So to accomplish that, we work with them to build, again, these devices.
All you have to do is just be kind of precise with this one here. Because the antenna is,
because it's built from old phones, they were able to see how it works. In fact, even help us put them together themselves.
Yeah, that's good.
And then, of course, to make sure they could pick up the sounds of chainsaws from very far away.
These aren't trash.
Climb very high in
trees. These are
trees.
actually really, really powerful little computers. They can connect to the networks that are there. They can record the sound. They can do all this great processing.
Anywhere from 30 to 50 meters up in the trees.
With making it possible to power them and making sure they can actually pick up sounds from a great distance. But all these are things that you can do with pretty standard electronics.
Cool. Pronto. There we go.
So you can see in the situation, they were able to help us build them so they understand it. They were able to climb the trees with us to install them. And based on situations like that, again, we're able to pick up the sounds of chainsaws. So let's
The very moment that a chainsaw is used in the forest, the noise is picked up.
There we are. The moment that chainsaw is used in the forest, it goes up through the cloud to an alert on someone's phone so they can show up and stop it. That's the sort of loop of reaction that we're trying to facilitate in these remote areas. So what does that actually look like in the field? Well, let's listen. So this here is the detection from our system for chainsaw. In this case, this one's in Peru. And this one's in maybe like 200, 300 meters away. And pretty much, I imagine everyone here can hear those chainsaws. But again, this isn't AI. This is artificial intelligence, CNN, convolutional neural network in the cloud that's able to pick out the sounds of chainsaws. That's what these boxes here represent. Now that, of course, is not terribly shocking. Even we can hear that. But what about something that's happening much further out? So again, this is a huge area, 2,500 square kilometers. What about being able to actually hear chainsaws that are very faint in the distance? So I'm not sure if anyone can hear that chainsaw. For me, it's very hard to hear. But it is there. And again, each of these squares represents an actual chainsaw detection taking place there in the field. Alerts like this, we're able to spring together that group of 30 rangers to be able to get out to the edge of the road for the truck, to be able to catch them on the way out. As you can see here, this logging truck on the way out, waiting at the end of the road were those 30 rangers and more. Who are able to seize the equipment, burn the equipment, do what they will with the trucks. And again, in this way, you're able to see that these rangers here can have a huge difference on fighting this. There's no police, law enforcement to stop them, but they are taking responsibility for it. And if we can help them build the tools, they can actually, to actually detect it, they will take responsibility for fixing it. We see this all over the world. But that just sort of underscores the fact that sometimes if you want to take a bite out of climate change using technology, you can really focus on hard tech like, electric cars, infrastructure, the rest, but sometimes just helping these guys, a guy like this, protect their own backyard can have a very outsized impact. Every single one of these rangers here, these guys off in the middle of nowhere in the forest, can have a bigger effect on fighting climate change than dozens of engineers at an electric car company. It's really, really impressive. And all we need to do is help them do their jobs more effectively. And for them to know that we care about what they do actually makes a very big difference in helping them to do it as well, not to mention the tools. So again, we've repeated this all over the world. This isn't quite up to date, but we're in well over 3,000 square kilometers of forest across 14 countries all over the world. And so many, many projects you see like that really matter. So again, yeah. So again, it's not just about catching loggers. So let's actually back up for a second. You heard these sounds from the forest. What else can we do with these streams? Well, it turns out that all of the noises from the forest we can capture in our cloud and stream them to you. So not only is this for sending alerts to rangers, but anybody like you or people you know can listen in live to the sounds of the forest around the world through this app that we put out. So it's almost like a constant 24-hour radio from around the world of the rainforest, using these old phones in boxes with solar panels up in trees, streaming constantly. It's really like a live radio from around all over the place, and it's always morning somewhere. It's always evening somewhere. There's always some point where you can tune into dawn or dusk or the middle of the night or the middle of the day in these forests around the world. So we encourage you to check that out. But again, now that we're sort of getting into what we can do with sound beyond just catching loggers, let's talk about bioacoustics. So again, the system is streaming this audio up into the cloud in real time. This is what we call a spectrogram. And so this is based on a live feed coming out of the forest. And again, you can see there's lots of stuff happening here. These are all sort of features of what's happening there. And you sort of heard it as well. But moving on to the analysis of this, we're not just catching chainsaws. We can begin to detect everything else as well. So what you can see is this cacophony of noise being decoded incrementally by the artificial intelligence in the clouds and presenting it to us in a way that allows us to appreciate the kind of ecology of all this put together. So again, this is just 1 minute of audio out of the hundreds of years of audio that are in our system from these really remote places. We're asking artificial intelligence, CNNs, to actually indicate which species, where they are and how they overlap there on the spectrogram. And if you're able to do this over, say, a second, that's one thing. Over a minute, that's one thing. But talk about this level of precision over an hour, a day, a week, a month, a year. And you can begin to see the sort of very ecology and the way these things change over months, the way in which they change based on human encroachment, the way they change based on normal evolution and seasonality, and the way they change based on climate change. And so, again, you can have this very, very precise technological tool for allowing scientists and conservationists to study the forest in a new way. And I think it sort of goes without saying, having heard that bioacoustics is just such a powerful tool for understanding the essence of the forest. We're very visual creatures. We always think about what we can see and what we can sort of experience ourselves. But when we're not there, that's when the forest comes alive. And so these recording stations around the world, bringing these live places in, archiving it, and allowing us to analyze it, really opens up a new sort of portal into the sort of essence of life there in the forest. There's one of our collaborators, a scientist in Costa Rica, who says that the combination of AI, the ability to analyze large amounts of data, and bioacoustics, which is the study of nature with sound, it really, really could lead to a new era of discovery, almost as important as the discovery of the microscope. The ability for us to peer into elements of nature that we haven't really understood before because we're not audio creatures is really very exciting for us. And so we hope to be a part of that as well. But sort of moving on, I would say that it's not just about the forest as well. So, well, no, actually, let's take a look at how the applications of bioacoustics in practice. So this is Costa Rica. This is one of our projects. This is the spider monkey, a very important endangered species in the area, which also distributes seeds. Again, we have a detector for spider monkeys for when they make these noises. And it turns out that spider monkeys are making noise all day long. We're tracking it. But there's one instance where spider monkeys actually started making noise in the middle of the night. We're trying to figure out what that was about. See if you can listen in. This is again at 11:20 p.m. when suddenly we heard a lot of spider monkeys, and it was because there was an earthquake that came in. and shaking the tree all over the place. This is basically an earthquake in the rainforest in Costa Rica in the middle of the night. And after this tree is shaken all over the place, what you can see is those spider monkeys woke up. They started yelling to each other at a distance for quite a few minutes. And this anomaly of noticing that spider monkeys who never vocalize at nighttime suddenly woke up and started yelling to each other, something was wrong. And we sort of went in there and discovered that there had been an earthquake at the time. So that's an example of how bioacoustics sometimes can tell you about things that you wouldn't have noticed otherwise. Additionally, we're building out these tools to allow scientists through the web consoles to be able to get in there. That's what I'll show you in just a minute, and to be able to label it. So again, we also are working not just in the forest, but we are doing live audio acoustic analysis from the oceans as well. Bioacoustics has been used to study soundscapes in the forest for a long time. And I can even sort of jump in here and say, look, let's listen live to this interface that we have to the sounds of orca whales in Vancouver. So again, the ability to sort of recognize orca whales is one thing, but to sift through years and years of audio data and find the moment when the orcas showed up there in that area of the ocean really matters. And through our partnership with local law enforcement here in Vancouver, DFO, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, is able to get an alert the moment that orcas show up throughout Vancouver Bay, and they're able to actually get out there and make sure the boat traffic does not intervene, because there's a very endangered subspecies of orcas in that area. So again, this is the idea. You have this this device up in the trees or in the forests or on the plains, or sometimes equivalents of that being in the ocean as well. But again, what's next for us? We are expanding throughout the world. That's what Chrissy is focusing on day and night, how to get us out all over the place so we can protect so much more. These are examples of projects that have taken place all over the world, and the successes that have come into them, being able to stop logging. We are expanding into, again, this is an old slide, we're expanding into a whole bunch more areas in the next year, even with the impacts of COVID-29. So this has been pushed off by a few months, but we hope to triple our impact in 2022 with 6,000 more square kilometers of forest protected. That's 450 years worth of audio coming out of the forest to help us understand these ecosystems. But again, just to back up, if you protect 6,000 square kilometers of forest, that's 30 million tons of CO2 that can be avoided going to the atmosphere, 6 million cars off the road, and 400 million trees. The amount of impacts you can have from protecting a modest amount of forest is actually pretty large. And the people are out there in the field who would help us do that. Chrissy's getting emails from people all the time, messages to get us out there into more places. For us, it's about, can we build the technology and get the team together fast enough to get out there and work with them? And moving forward in terms of bioacoustics, again, we have these devices that go in trees, but at the center of it all is the equivalent of a little phone. And so what if we can get to the point where we can take out the solar panels, take out the boxes, take out the microphone, and just these old phones people are throwing away by the hundreds of millions every year? What if that is enough for us to be able to detect real sort of bioacoustic changes throughout the world, on your windowsill in Canada, on your doorstep in America, and even just out there in the forest? How can we use sort of technology that's already lying around to accomplish these things? So again, we are Rainforest Connection. Hopefully you can work with us, and we look forward to knowing more about your work as well. Thanks a lot. So I think we can kind of open it up to questions now. I'm not sure what should come next. Hey, Chrissy.
Yeah, questions. Topher, what was the biggest challenge in putting this amazing tech together and making it work?
That was the biggest challenge, was making it work. Yeah, any sort of idea sounds great. Even on that first day, I sort of showed at the beginning of the presentation, when you sort of had the idea, suggested it to the people there. They said, yes, please build that. But it still took over a year to sort of get the first version working. And then probably took another 3 years before we can say, 3 or 4 years before we can say it reliably works. Even today, we're still building and designing these new things, new technology. These are totally new solar panels we're putting out there. We're constantly having to improve it just to keep track with what's happening in the forest. And the forest, it's almost like an arms race. Technology, it doesn't work. It's not supposed to work out there. Like these places are really harsh environments. It's wet, it's hot. There's very little sunlight under the tree canopy. All the things you would normally need to make technology work don't really exist out there. And then you have like termites and ants that are tearing everything apart all the time. let alone monkeys potentially. So yeah, I'd say the forest is a very harsh environment. Making technology work there is one of the biggest challenges for us. But the ultimate challenge is getting people to do what we hope they will. So we can't tell people to respond and stop logging. They come to us saying they would like to. But even then, we have to consistently reinvent ways to make it easier and less dangerous for them to do it, and incentivize them to take that like big risky step, which is going out there and stopping loggers. What do you, Chrissy, you talk to people about this all the time. What are you hearing from them?
Yeah, I mean, the tech is working really well across projects around the world. I mean, absolutely everything you just said. We had another question though. Let's do that. Have you come across a situation where the loggers have found the devices or the people that are being paid off by them?
So fortunately for us, the devices are like way up in trees. So like 30 to 50 meters up in trees, which makes it a challenge to install them sometimes. But once they're there, they last for a long time. And so it's easy for us to even forget which trees we put them in sometimes. So it's hard to know that they're there. There is one instance in Cameroon where we didn't put one very high in a tree, and a local pygmy baka came by and took it off the tree. But because it was recording and listening, we were able to listen in as he took it back and talked about it with other people, and then somebody went and bought it back from him. So that's the one instance where somebody took it. But in general, we try and make sure that our partners there on the ground, if they catch loggers, they don't necessarily mention to them how they got caught. Because usually when you get caught, how you got caught is not the highest concern on your list. And sometimes it's helpful to imbue a sense of mystery around how they knew that they were logging there in the first place.
For sure. Topher, do you have any advice for young innovators?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. You got to build stuff. It's easy to want to talk. I'm here talking to you about what we're doing right now, and I talked a lot about what we do. But sometimes talking about it gets in the way of getting it done, because sometimes when you talk about something, you get the validation that you sort of need to show that it can work. So if I talk to you about this, you would say, "Oh, that's a great idea," and I wouldn't necessarily get down to doing it. In the case, I'm a horrible procrastinator, so I always take too long to get things done. But it really helps in our case that we're building technology for other people. We're building it for the guys off in the forest. We're building it for the scientists. And so they come to us and say, hey, when is this going to be done? We need this working. It's not working. Can you fix it? All these sorts of things. It really helps to build something that's used by people that they come to depend upon. And to do that, it's best to find people who really aren't getting the right attention. If I were to try and build another sort of taxi hailing app or something like that, it wouldn't necessarily be terribly urgent. But if you go to people that have not been served by technology, they're far more likely to give you feedback and be anxious to work with you and push you to get it built.
Yeah, that's great. I also just saw a question: have we ever seen found an endangered species in an area not typical for them to exist? I can speak to that a little bit. Rainforest Connection actually has a whole science team of really awesome PhD ecoacoustic biologists. And so they're able to build models for hundreds of species in a region, but they're also able to recognize if there's a species that hasn't been identified yet. And so that makes this a really awesome application to figure out what species we may not know are in certain areas and what species we know are.
Yeah, and so hopefully we'll get to the point where technology can sort of read these things anyway, like this species doesn't belong here, what's it doing here? But this is not very uncommon. So what you're seeing is that with climate change, with changes in temperature all over the place, animals themselves aren't just giving up, they're moving around to accommodate. And so in many cases, what you're going to see is entire species that shift up to higher altitude or down to lower altitude. And so the changing ecosystems where animals exist is going to be one of the biggest changes over the next few decades, I think.
Yeah, and it's extremely important to know where they are and be able to protect them. And acoustics is really a great way to do that on a large scale.
Mm-hmm. There's so many secrets in the acoustics that we never thought of before. When you're walking through the forest, like a person isn't necessarily like a hunter or a poacher, they're not making noise. The loggers if they're walking through, aren't making noise. A tiger or a jaguar isn't making noise. So you couldn't hear those things directly, but you know that like the birds and animals are talking about them. So what if we can use the sound, like the sounds of other animals to tell when certain things are happening? That's the next step for us.
Yeah. Any more questions? I think we're just about out of time. we're really interested to hear everyone's ideas. And so if you go to our website, rfcx.org, you can find an email address. And so if you have any ideas or anything, we'd love to hear from you and get you involved in the work.
Thank you so much for taking the time today. And Chrissy, thanks for joining too.
Yeah, thanks, Topher.
Cool. Have a great day, everybody. Reach out to us if you will.